What is a Dharma talk? Or perhaps better, what are they for? They're not really a lecture, a reading, the unfolding of a logical argument. In one sense, they're not really addressed to the understanding. We can think about a Dharma talk more like a demonstration, a showing us. So rather than a lecture on Pride and Prejudice, it's more like a chemistry demonstration. Look, we put this and that in the same test tube and they fizz up and change colour, or explode, or whatever. Look, something's happening in front of you. And they share that with the koan. And maybe it would be nice to do a talk about koans soon. Because a koan is a showing. Stories about historic showings, sometimes historic failures to show. But that's the intent, that's the purpose of them. Not to demonstrate understanding in that sense. And in fact, the catch in the koan is usually that somebody tries to show their understanding, and that's to fall flat on your face because you're trying to show, demonstrate. So the word enacting is actually quite nice. When something is enacted, the very act of doing it makes it so. We can think about the marriage ceremony. It's not a description of marriage. It's a making so. We say the words. Unless you say the words, it's not real. And if we say the words in the right way at the right time, that makes it so. But then what are we enacting? Well, in a sense, and this is where it gets a bit enigmatic, what we're enacting is the Dharma, whatever we think that is. We know that this word can refer to pretty much anything. The actual written word of the Buddha, commentaries, the teachings, or the things of the world, or the things of the world seen as expressing the Dharma. But one thing we can keep coming back to is presence. The presence, the way that the Dharma simply is us, right here, right now. And that question, if not here, where? If not now, when? If the Dharma's not this, then what is it? Yet, the Dharma talk obviously is part of a tradition. It's part of a series of talks that go back literally thousands of years. And we're not the first. And we should never pretend that we're the first to address this or address this in this way. And yet, we talk about the living Dharma if we're just going to parrot, repeat the words of others. Well, is that about the presence of the Dharma here, now, as this? It only lives as we enact it, renew it, make it fresh, make us experience it as us, as here, now. And it's in that sense that we can talk about, as does get talked about in quite a Zen notion, the Dharma of the birds, the Dharma of the brook as it babbles past, the teaching going on in each moment, each thing, everywhere. Omnipresence. Why would this moment, why would this place, why would I be any different from that? So we can talk about it as the presence of something which is always present, and yet we don't always experience as present. And in actual fact, probably a lot of the reason we came to practice, probably a lot of the reason that we're sat down here and now listening to this is because we don't always experience that presence as present. We don't always get, not understand. What's understanding in that sense? But we don't always get that we are the Dharma. We can only ever be that. So we try and find, out of this vast heap of tradition, out of the experience of actually sitting here and returning and returning and returning to sit here, out of this heap of tradition, of words, and of this practice that we've inherited, which is itself thousands of years old, we try and find that living experience, those living words. So to ask a really stupid but quite obvious question, how is the Dharma talk supposed to make us feel? It's obviously great if it's inspiring, if it sends us off back to a cushion to practice. Yes, this is the path, yes. But at the same time, it's not supposed to carry us off. It's not supposed to be, now I am that character in the movie. Now I've lost myself in this story. In fact, I'm put in mind of the great German playwright Bertolt Brecht and the idea of the alienation effect that, in the middle of the play, the characters will turn around and address the audience and start discussing something completely otherwise. Why? Because we want to bring it back to here. It's about you. Okay, it's a story about them, but it's about you. Here, now. What are you going to do? Not just about feeling good or feeling bad, for that matter. So we break the story. We break our thoughts. In a way, it's too simple. Come back to Barry's idea of sitting, you can't do it wrong. So why do we make it complicated? Why over and over and over again do we make it complicated? And in a sense, Dharma talk, rather than spinning this wonderful construction that we can dance on, is constantly trying to bring us back down to earth, with paradox, with contradiction, with not getting it, being put off. Which isn't to say it should make us feel bad. Why feel bad? That's just another negative emotion, and it may be that I need support, I need reassurance, I need confirmation. And it's not wrong if it provides any of these, but Let's think about the original Dharma talks. I'm thinking of two talks in particular. The turning the wheel of the Dharma talk and the fire talk that, according to our record, our Buddhist tradition, which we have no reason to believe or disbelieve really. These are two of the first talks that Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, gave to a small band of disciples. And they're about shocking imagery. All is suffering. Life is suffering. Birth is suffering. Death is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. Getting what you don't want is suffering. Oh, they're about fire. Fire. Everything is on fire. The world is on fire. How do we douse the flames? And of course I'm reminded that, according again to the traditional story, the Buddha, after his enlightenment, was not keen to teach. I alone. I've got it. Nobody else is going to get it. How could I possibly share this? And of course, in the story, the Indian god Brahma comes along, as he does in various places. Says, hey Shakyamuni, there are many different people with many different degrees of maturity and readiness to receive the teaching. Some have relatively little dust in their eye. They only need the slightest nudge for awakening, for realization. Others, not so much. And so we have this idea of the Dharma talk as the Dharma rain. It rains evenly over the whole ground. And accordingly, as you're a herb or a shrub or a piece of moss or a mighty tree, you take up and you absorb of the Dharma what you can. Now, here. Frankly, sometimes that's rather indigestible. You need to come back. You need to come back again. Some of the most powerful Dharma talks I've heard have been those that I really, hang on, it's not right. Or, hang on, I really don't get that. Or, whatever. What resonates? And very often it can be a phrase, maybe a whole sentence, maybe just a word, and that's, oh, okay. Yeah, I can use that. That connects with me. That's the rain, the bit of the rain that I can actually use at this moment. And then maybe in another moment, I hear it differently. I've talked, we have the books of Joko Beck's Dharma talks, and yeah, I've probably read them 10 times, all at least, and it's like reading a different book every time. Today I hear this Dharma. In this way I receive what I can. Words are always very approximate, and, can we align as speaker, as hearer? Joko always talked about how, you always get it wrong as the teacher. You never say what you mean. Comes out too much that way or too much that way. You try and compensate. And again, there's a story about her giving the same talk, 10 consecutive talks, and nobody really noticing. And that's a bit like Thich Nhat Hanh, who one of his monks asked him, Tai, why do you always give the same set of talks over and over and over again? And he says, well, I'll carry on giving them until people start getting them. People start understanding. Though equally on another occasion, I'm reliably informed, said, well, how else am I going to get people to sit on their bums for 2 hours straight? It's just, forget it. Sit down, listen. They will sit. So it's not understanding. Well, it's not understanding in that intellectual sense. And we have the Heart Sutra, Prajna Paramita, wisdom beyond wisdom. Understanding beyond understanding. What do we mean by that? Well, in ordinary mind, we have this wonderful phrase, life as it is. For me, it comes back to that, which is the Dharma of the birds, the Dharma of the teachings, the lesson of my own struggle, my own resistance, my own responses. It's more a felt understanding. Come back to this idea of resonate, embody. What makes sense not to the head as an abstract argument, but to the felt experience of being this person, living this life. And remembering that if we're talking about the present moment, it's not the present moment cut off from every other moment. It's past and future as I am experiencing them. The culmination of one, the looking towards of the future as just this person, this body, these thoughts, these feelings. And in many ways, Dharma talk is a negative task. What stops us? What gets in the way of just being a life as it is, being this moment as it is? Well, basic Buddhist answer is delusion. And again, we have this complex explanation. We see things wrong, so we draw the wrong conclusions. We've drawn the wrong conclusions, so we see things wrong. Da-da, 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 and so on ad nauseum. And in a sense, the Dharma talk is just trying to throw the odd spanner into this well-oiled machine of delusion. And things break and things fly off and there's funny noises come out. And maybe things just stop for a moment. And we get the opportunity to see differently, feel differently. If we can do that, we've done something showing us our delusions. And for a moment, being a little more. This moment, this place, this life that is my life, as it is right here, right now. That's kind of the end of the talk and kind of not, because maybe the most powerful Dharma talk I've ever heard was actually one that Barry gave, just a Saturday morning talk, one I just happened to be in New York for. Anyway, Gary Snyder, the poet, Buddhist poet, very famous Buddhist poet, one of his more recent poems, this was, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, something like that. So it's probably a collection that came out about 10 years ago. It was a long poem about the death of his wife. Not a nice death, not a pretty death. I think it was cancer, but it was, one of these things where you do pretty much fall apart. And it was him and his family coping with her last days, her last moments, and then taking it through to actually organising and attending the cremation with everything which that involved. And this wasn't some sanitised, take it behind a curtain, goodbye job. It was, here you go into the furnace. And okay, this Dharma talk was literally just a reading of this poem. Except to understand this, you had to know that Barry's first wife had died in a plane crash quite a few years before. But that sense of immediacy of loss and severing. And of course, while he was reading this, by the end of it, he'd just broken down. Just floods of tears, barely able to control his voice. And what was the showing? What was the teisho here, as we say? This was showing the teacher not as perfectly equanimous, balanced, unaffected by all circumstances. This was showing the teacher as profoundly human, profoundly vulnerable, just being his own honest response to the poet's attempt to frame in words an honest response to the death of the person that he'd loved and lived with for decades. We try and bring some manner of showing to a talk. We try and connect as listeners our own practice. Can we find the way to speak? Can we find to hear living words? Even if I'm here and you're there listening, it's still in this sense a dialogue. We need each other. It's the creation, it's the exploration of a relationship. So I suppose that says everything and nothing about a Dharma talk. And perhaps that's as it should be.